Shalom, sweetest friends. I'd like to share a piece of Torah from last week, and I apologize for its late delivery, but it really spoke wonders to me, and I hope that it enlightens you as well. This past Parsha was a double portion, but the first one of which was Parshat Behar. And in Parshat Behar, there's a topic discussed about what happens when a Jew falls to such depravity, such a destitute state, that he needs to sell himself. And he sells himself so much so not to a Jew, which we know the requirement is that he only work up until the 7th year, or he can't work more than 6 years, let's say. But even so, with a non-Jew, he sells himself, and thereby he would only be eligible for freedom once Yovel hit, or until the payment of his debt is resolved. So this is spoken in the Torah as a very bad situation. The man is living in the land of Israel, and he falls to such a state that there's a wealthy non-Jew, and he sells himself too. So this is spoken about in Perek Chaf Hey of Parshas Behar in the book of Vayikra. And if you look at Perek Chaf Hey, Pasuk Memchet, so 25, chapter 25, verse 48 and verse 49. And it says that when someone had become totally impoverished to the state, and he ended up selling himself to an idol-worshipping family, and he was catering to the idol, and Rashi goes and tells us later in the Parsha as to what happened to this individual, where if you look at Perek Chaf Vav, Pasuk Aleph and Bet, so right there, Rashi tells us what occurred. These are the last two verses of the Parsha. So Rashi says that such a person went to every single length to, rectify his destitute state. He had a debt, and he tried to sell his furniture, and he couldn't sell his furniture enough, and so he had to sell his house, and the house wasn't enough, and so he had to sell his daughter. He could sell her up until the age of 12, and that wasn't enough, and he could sell himself, but himself isn't as valuable to a Jew as it is to a non-Jew, because to a non-Jew he could work even more, and so ultimately he falls in the hands of being the servant of a non-Jew. And this type of individual, again, to go back to Perek Chaf Hey, Pasuk Memchet, this type of individual is in need of serious redemption. And so in speaking about who could do that redemption, if we look at verse 48, it says, after he's been sold, he shall have redemption. One of his brothers shall redeem him. And then verse 49 says, or his uncle, or his cousin shall redeem him, or a relative from his family shall redeem him, or if he ends up having his own means, then he, sufficiently, so then he should redeem himself. So there's two obvious issues here. Wondering if you could spell them out. Who do you think is missing, and what do you have to say about the order of the characters mentioned in these verses? So, who's missing? The father. If everything is about, who's close to this individual, so why isn't the father mentioned? We clearly have that his brothers should redeem him before his cousins or his uncle. And if I was to ask you, why did the pasuk say that individual first, the brother? So you'd say because he's closest to him. But if he's closest to him, then who's more close to a person than themselves? Why does he express himself at the end? Why is it that if he has enough money, then he should redeem himself at the outset? Why is it only after the brothers, uncle, cousins does he redeem himself? So these are the two issues that I'd like to address. That if you've got this is really about who's close to a person. Why isn't the father mentioned? And even more so than the father, why is the person themselves who had to go into this servitude mentioned last in the verse, in verse 49? So to draw a contrast, or at least a comparison, I should say, if you open up Parshat Pinchas in the Sefer Bamidbar, so you'll see that in Perek Chaf Zayin, chapter 27, verse 9, Pasuk Tet, so you'll see that it speaks about the laws of inheritance. This was with Benot Slavchad, so they were daughters, they were women who were going to go into the land of Israel. There were no people who could inherit the father that were male, so they want to know what was going to happen with their father's portion. And Moshe gets some wisdom from Hashem, and it's taught over in this way. So if we look, it says that in Pasuk Chet, there it says, if a man will die and he has no son, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass to the daughters. If he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, you should give his inheritance to the brother of the father, in other words, his uncle. And if he has no brothers of his father, then you give inheritance to the closest relative of the family. And that's the person who should inherit it. So again, who's not mentioned here? Who's not mentioned is the father. There's no mention of a father inheriting this individual. So we ask, why would that be the case? Why are we leaving out someone who's unbelievably close to the individual who just passed away? So the Ramban here expresses in Parshat Pinchas two reasons as to why the Torah is leaving out the father. First, it's just a basic halachic rule, he says. It's a basic halachic rule that if you can inherit somebody, they can inherit you. His exact lashon is kol hamanchil nochel. Anyone who can inherit, since a son can inherit from a father, so if lo aleinu, the son passes away, the father can inherit as well. And when it comes, and so therefore it doesn't mention it. And his second reason is because the Torah likes to talk about blessings. The Torah likes to talk about good things. And this is something that never ever should occur to somebody, that you should outlive your own children. And so, since the Torah wants to talk about only blessings in the words of the Ramban, so he doesn't say that. He says bracha yedaber velo benichratim, that the Torah always wants to talk about a manner of blessing, and it doesn't want to talk about people who were tragically cut off. So says the Ramban, and so therefore it's not mentioning the father. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe has an insight into both of these circumstances, and expresses that what happened here in our Parsha, in Parshat Behar, was, as Rashi puts it, a person has fallen to a state where he literally is becoming the servant of this non-Jew who's worshiping idols, and who's doing many other things. And the servant, the Jewish servant, is actually stating, since my master practices sexual immorality, I'll be like him. And since my master worships idols, I'll be like him. And since my master desecrates the Shabbos, I'll be like him. And the person fell to this state, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, because a person did not have the father in their life. The father that's represented here in the Kabbalistic Sfirot, if you think of all of them, there are 10 Sfirot, there are 3 thinking, conscious, mind-active Sfirot, Chachma, Bina, and Da'at, and then there are the 7 emotional faculties that rest underneath them. The father of all these 10 is called Chachma. Bina is known as the mother. Bina happens when you're working through, you're trying to come to understand an issue. Chachma, the Rebbe says, is wisdom, is the place where our soul can literally come in contact with God, can touch God. What does that mean? That Chachma is the place where we come in contact with God. So some people say the more knowledge you have, Chachma is wisdom, knowledge, the more knowledge that you have, the more God-like you are. The Rebbe says not like that. The father aspect that's coming into play here, the father aspect that allowed for this person to fall into this destitute state, or that metaphorically speaking in Parshat Pinchas had the person die, was when the father aspect was not involved in this man's life. That father aspect is Chachma. Chachma is the ability to be, as oddly enough as it is, that it's given a masculine trait, it's given the word father to describe it. Chachma is the ability to be unbelievably humble and quiet and just receive. You see, Chachma is a piece of wisdom that someone doesn't deduce and derive and figure out and work. That's in Bina and Dat. But Chachma is the wisdom that comes to a person through silence, through being a complete receiver, through abnegation, nullification of one's entire ego. When you nullify your ego and you're beholden unto the Father, some of us are fathers, they are able to nullify our ego. We're able to just follow. It's an amazing thing that when somebody is able to not put their own mind into it and they're just to follow. It's beautiful to figure something out, work a problem out, have your own innovation, but there's also something unbelievably pristine and sweet to someone who can just not inject themselves into every circumstance, into every single idea, but just receive. And the words of the Torah, in order for them to permeate somebody's life, one needs to be open to just receive. Sometimes that involves a meditation. Sometimes that involves a no interruption. Sometimes that involves just being humble and silent and at peace. And I think a lot of us in today's world, we struggle with that process of being at peace. We're always trying to be active and inject the next idea into a circumstance and come up with a resolution. But if you speak to great artists and great innovators, they'll tell you that their greatest ideas come from the complete silence. In Yiddish, I'm remembering a piece of Torah from Rabbi Akiva Tatz. He talked about an Einfalt is the Yiddish expression for an idea. And in Yiddish, that means it fell in. Einfalt, it fell in. So the idea wasn't your own. It didn't come from you. God blessed you with it. When your mind is free from distractions and it's open to all possibilities, and you're deeply invested in just hearing the voice of Hashem, the idea will come. The idea will fall in. And the humility translates to a sincere devotion. In Yiddishkeit, someone who is so humble is willing to make themselves a complete servant. And Rashi tells us so many times in this Parsha that the purpose or why this is happening, or why you can't have a slave be treated in certain ways, or why there's a limit on the amount of time that a slave can be, or even while he's in servitude, know that he's always mine. Hashem is reminding that there's always a covenant that came before. There's always a servitude to him that precedes any servitude that one has on this earth. But to be walking around with that acceptance that my servitude is first and foremost to Hashem, one needs to have that chachma, one needs to have that father, one needs to be humble. And I think the lesson is quite profound here, because the Rebbe takes it to this whole other level to elucidate the verse as to why the father isn't mentioned, why the brother, the uncle, the cousin, and why the person himself last. Hopefully it should be that when we all accept the chachma in our life, we accept to be open to understanding, we accept to be open to receiving the blessing from above, we will be ushering in the Mashiach faster and closer than ever. We won't have what happens in Parshas Pinchas, where someone dies and the father is absent. The father will be present, and the laws of inheritance will not need to apply because the father will always be there. The laws do not need to happen where this tragic death even takes place, because if the father was in the verse in Parshat Pinchas, the man wouldn't die. And if the father was in the verse in Parshat Behar, the man would never go into such servitude where he's saimech, he's close to just worshipping even the idol themselves. Rashi cautions us to tell us that a Jew could never do such a thing, that he was being the custodian of such an area. Instead of sweeping the floors of the Beis Hamikdash, he's sweeping the floors of the house of idolatry, the church, for instance. So if the Father is present, then Mashiach will come so fast. But what will be that order of things? So we know that Dod, the word for uncle that's in the verse, in verse 49, chapter 25 of our Parsha, Parshat Behar, it says Dodo. Dod is another language for our most beloved. Who's our most beloved? We learn from Shir Hashirim, we learn from the expression Avani lidodi v'dodi li. Everybody loves to have that on their banner when they're getting married. Our ultimate beloved is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that beloved will come and redeem us. With who? With the cousin, with the Ben Dod. With the Ben Dod. Who's the Ben Dod? Mashiach himself. We will have HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Mashiach coming into our lives because the Father will be present. The Av will be there. We will be open and be filled with wisdom, with the supernal wisdom, with the wisdom of the Torah. And that will empower us, a person, to actually redeem themselves. The verse makes no sense. If the guy's got money, why is he even falling into a destitute state? It's because the order of which is one where Hashem and Mashiach come and they allow a person to be utterly redeemed out of this state of exile, out of these trappings of this world that seems to be pulling us away from Hashem. And so with this light, hopefully we welcome the fathers in our lives. Hopefully the fathers want to be in the lives of their children. Hopefully the fathers realize the importance and the critical role that they play in having chachma, having humility come into their child's life. And an aspect about the father that I want to make sure I don't forget to mention is that in many, many people, this aspect of chachma, this father, is dormant, is asleep. It's not gone, but it's in a resting state. Sometimes the things that we've done in our lives, they just put it down, put it so quiet to sleep. And that's what I mean. We can paradoxically arouse all the other faculties, but the one that cannot be stimulated necessarily or seems to get put down by all the activity in our lives is chachma. Chachma gets put to rest. And every single person needs to be awakened. The Rebbe is encouraging us to awaken ourselves and awaken others. And for so many people, that's a different thing. For some people, it's literally the end of their life. If you were to kill them as a Jew or a non-Jew, if you were to take their identity. For other people, what jolts them is a mere violation of muksa. There's a story of Yossi the thief, the righteous thief. It's written on his grave. The story goes that in Poland, Yossi, his trade, his entire being, his parnasa, he defined himself as a thief. Everywhere he went, he knew how to swindle you, get you, grab it, run, everything. One day he decided to steal from the church, but they caught him. And the goyim there, they went crazy. They were so excited to get his trial expedited, process him, and get him to have the death penalty. The judge, upon reading the sentence, turns to him and says, "If you will renounce your Judaism, I will rip up this document. I will nullify this sentence." And Yossi couldn't. To call him a thief, to kill him, he was fine with. But to say that he's not a Jew, he'll never do. So he threw him in a dungeon, and he's waiting his trial. Sorry, he's waiting his execution. And they come to him. They make him another offer. They say, not only will your sentence be revoked, not only will your sentence be destroyed, it'll be as if it never happened, but we'll leave you a wealthy man. We'll give you this estate if you'll just renounce your Judaism. And he couldn't do it. And they made his execution utterly unbearable. They made a fire for 3 days, and they would burn different parts of his body. They would say, we could still save your feet if you'll just renounce your Judaism. And then they would burn more of him. And he had the most agonizing and excruciating death. And every single time he went into that fire, he screamed so loud, the entire town heard the cries. He would say, I'm Yasala, the thief, and a Jew forever. I'm Yasala, a thief, and a Jew forever. And so that's what they wrote. They wrote that he's a righteous Jew, a thief, on his tombstone. So there's different aspects where all of a sudden the humility, the chachma inside of us is awakened. And that's one of the things that the Rebbe was pointing at. The reason why this man himself only attains the assets to redeem himself at the end of the verse as opposed to in the beginning of the verse is because through the brother and through the uncle and through the cousin, whoever that may be, if you want to interpret it as those relatives that are near him, those other Jews, or even HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mashiach himself, arouse and awaken and poke and prod at that pintel yid, and it comes bursting forth. And when that comes out, he is in full redemption. He is no longer the custodian of the idol. So may we all accept the chachma in our lives, the humility to be full servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which will draw Hashem in. It will be utterly seductive. Hashem will be drawn into our lives. The Dod will come in, and the Ben Dod will follow, Mashiach. And we will rise up with all the riches, all the Torah, full hearts, to be together as one again. Have a great week.